Lara Hyams now is in Scott Morrison's electorate in Cook, which takes in the southern suburbs of Sydney. Lara, what's the picture there?
Well, Ros, I think it's clear that if a three-way was to be held in this electorate, Scott Morrison would remain as the clear winner here. As you said, south of Sydney, about 30 kilometres where we are. This is the suburb of Cronulla. This is Scott Morrison's seat and has been for quite a while. He's got a very safe lead here. His margin is about 15%. And just next to him is the seat of Hughes, and that is the seat that is held by Craig Kelly. So all this area is very safe Liberal heartland. Some of the people here this morning have credited Scott Morrison with two main policy areas which they have welcomed. One being on the Treasury front and the finances of the country, and also on the immigration. Now, with the finances, many people have been impressed with his credentials in delivering tax cuts and also his ability to ameliorate bracket creep. But the other area has been on immigration. Now, obviously, Scott Morrison was one of the main people who implemented the Operation Sovereign Borders policy under Tony Abbott, and that was when we had the zero tolerance approach to asylum seekers arriving by boat, and also that coupled with mandatory detention. There were some critics of that. Obviously, those weekly briefings that the media would have and what the agency would report had stopped, and there was also another controversial element to it being the boat towbacks. But many people here generally see that policy as a success. Now, when I was asking them this morning about the comparison if Peter Dutton was to take the reins and lead the country, many of them were not impressed with that prospect. They say that he is unnecessarily being credited with immigration policy success, which is just building on what Scott Morrison had already introduced. The other area which they have been perhaps slightly aggrieved over is that when Peter Dutton had tried to perhaps announce an economic policy taking out the GST on electricity, it was Scott Morrison which blew the lid on that and said that that would blow a multi-billion-dollar hole in the budget. So a lot of the people here don't view Mr Dutton as economically sound to be able to deliver the books in a really good way. Let's have a listen to what those members of the electorate had to say this morning.
Probably Scott Morrison, I would say.
Tell me why.
I think he's confident. I think he's done a good job with the portfolios he's had before, and he's local.
Primarily it's been Malcolm Turnbull that's done what has happened to the Liberal Party, not just the last week, over a considerable period of time. So I think my major disappointment is with the performance of Malcolm Turnbull.
Who would have your support to lead the country?
None of them, no.
Tell me why.
They just don't speak to us. They don't really, I don't know, they've done nothing that, is amazing.
I think he's done a great job in what his portfolios he's been doing. He's delivered 3 budgets and they've all been very good, as I'm concerned. So I would support him above either of the others. Although I do think that Julie Bishop is, fairly good at what she does too, and very strong as a politician.
I never voted for him, I never will.
What would they need to do to get your support?
Provide a fair bit of honesty, or some honesty.
Local in the area?
Yeah. But I wouldn't pick him.
Why?
Because I like Julie Bishop, and I think that she's the one that's got the numbers to get there.
Lara, people there with clear opinions in Scott Morrison's electorate of Cook, but did you also find a lot of people who've just been disappointed, even embarrassed about events in Canberra?
Ros, there's that common, overwhelming sense of ambivalence that's been across, I think, a lot of the electorates, particularly in Sydney. That has been echoed here as well. Also, a lot of frustration in the way that Canberra has handled this situation and the changing of leadership. Another point which has emanated from some of the voices here has been how some of the main contenders seem to have turned on their leader within the last few days. We saw earlier in the week Scott Morrison and before that Peter Dutton actually backing Malcolm Turnbull, and all of that managed to change and culminate in the last few days. So there has been that frustration and perhaps distrust in the system, and the people feeling that perhaps they've been a little bit dispowered, that they have voted for a particular member to serve a full term of Parliament, but it hasn't managed to happen on this front, Ros.
All right, Lara, thank you.